An introduction to language and human being. Anthropology is a study of humanity, and there are different subfields of the discipline. So anthropologists are interested in several really important components of being a human. On the first hand, we're interested in human biology. We are embodied beings, and so understanding our biology is important to understand who we are. We need to understand our evolution and our history, that is, our change through time. This is an important part of anthropology as well. We also need to understand learned behavior or culture. That is, our biology and our instincts don't constitute all of our behavior. Much of our behavior comes out of our social interaction and is learned. And so anthropologists believe understanding culture is very important. Finally, anthropologists believe language also to be an essential part of being a human. And so we use language in its myriad forms, different forms of narrative or story and literature, to understand the human condition and experience. We use language to understand kind of two aspects of human beings, the human condition or human experience. On the one hand, we want to understand what is universal. So when I say universal, what I'm talking about is what is common to all human beings, regardless of any particular population that they are a part of. So this is something that we have shared in common, right, across those populations, universals. But we're also interested in what are called particularities. So this is different than a universal. On the one hand, universals, right, is that shared commonality, and particularities are those things, those traits, those characteristics, those qualities, and so on, that we see among a particular population. We can think about the study of human universals as something that anthropologists use scientific methods to try to understand. So anthropologists will use comparative methods, looking at insights, let's say, across different languages, to understand broader patterns of meaning that are inherent, right, to human life. So, for example, work that has been done in anthropology shows that regardless of what language you speak in this world, all humans use pronouns, right? They refer to I as the speaker, he, she, it, they, them, and so on. Pronouns are a universal. We see that common across all languages. Humans can use language to refer to quantities, regardless of the language that they're speaking. It's a universal. They can evaluate things in the world as good or bad. They can have mental and emotional verbs like think and feel, have. They can refer to existential states like life and death. They can use logic, because, if. All of those kinds of words are universal. All of those kinds of statements, right, about the world and about being human are common to all particular human groups. We see that all humans speak and write with reference to things like color. Colors like white, black, red can be found in all languages. We see things like kin. The term mother, for example, is a universal that can be stated or expressed, right, in all languages. And then sort of above, just thinking about, let's say, vocabulary, concepts, and categories and so on, we can see that all human narratives or stories have characters, they have settings, they have plots, they have conflicts, they have ways of resolving conflicts, and they have broader themes and meaning that are important to a particular group of people. All of that is universal to our human being. In fact, Jerome Bruner has suggested that narrative is not merely a form of communication or a way to convey information, but it's really a fundamental mode of human being. Humans use story or narrative to organize and interpret their experience and to help them make a meaningful life, right? To construct meaningful representations of themselves and the world around them. There's anywhere between 6,000 and 8,000 different languages. And when we start looking at one particular language, we also see there are particular narratives and particular stories that only exist in one particular context. And so for the study of particulars in this manner, we used humanistic methods. We use methods that are not necessarily scientific. They're not based in a model, let's say, from the hard sciences. We're trying to understand meaning. And to understand meaning, it needs a different kind of method or a different kind of approach. It's something similar to maybe doing translation or interpretation. The specific meaning of a narrative, as we understand in anthropology, is closely tied to a learned way of life of one community, one particular culture, and thus requires this work of interpreting it in relationship to that culture. Humans express their thoughts and ideas in narrative or stories that relate specifically how they're living their life, how they're existing, how they're subsisting, that particular point of view on the world. They express their thoughts and their ideas in narratives and stories in terms of how they relate to others in a very specific, learned kind of way. So we see differences in the kind of conflicts people are experiencing. We see differences in the way that they'll resolve that conflict in relationship to other people. We think that humans express their thoughts and ideas in relationship to their concrete beliefs, right? The kinds of themes and meanings they find in the world are not always universal, but they can be very closely tied, right, to the particular culture of a community. Clifford Geertz, another important anthropologist, focused on the skill of interpretation. So there's the looking at particulars and trying to understand the particularity of human being, but there's also this kind of reflection that we do on how we are interpreting stories, how we are interpreting narratives, and the work, what actually the technique is to interpret a story. Geertz argued that a good understanding of a particular story or narrative really depends on this interpretive work of putting the narrative into its cultural context. So to conclude here, right, we're talking about how important language is in anthropology. We said that it's really important for two different kinds of issues. On the one hand, thinking about what unites us as human beings across our differences. And to do so, we often use scientific methods that are comparative and draw us out of one particular cultural context. And so anthropologists are equally interested in studying the particulars, focusing in on one particular community, one particular culture, and using these humanistic methods to try to understand narratives and stories that are produced within their cultural context.